The Galactic Coalition Training Academy stood on the barren moon of Keth IV, a massive complex of silver domes and towering spires that housed the finest young warriors from 12 different species across the known galaxy. And on this particular morning, the main lecture hall buzzed with the energy of 300 cadets who had gathered to watch a presentation about combat training methods from various member worlds. Commander Zethros, a Torvani officer who stood nearly 8 feet tall with thick gray skin and 4 muscular arms, controlled the holographic display from his position at the front of the hall, and he cycled through footage from different planets with practiced ease, showing the brutal gladiatorial pits of Torvan Prime, the zero-gravity combat chambers of the Valorian homeworld, and the underwater hunting trials of the aquatic Malori species. The cadets watched with interest and pride as their respective homeworld training methods appeared on screen. But when the display shifted to show footage from Earth, the atmosphere in the hall changed dramatically. A human military boot camp appeared in the holographic projection, showing young men and women running through obstacle courses, crawling under wire barriers, and practicing hand-to-hand combat techniques on padded mats. And almost immediately, laughter erupted from the Torvani section of the audience. Rektal, a young Torvani cadet with dark gray skin and arms thicker than most humans' torsos, stood up from his seat and pointed at the screen with undisguised amusement, declaring loudly that his infant siblings played rougher games than what these humans called military training. His comment drew more laughter from the cadets around him, and soon the mockery spread through the hall like wildfire, with species after species joining in to ridicule what they saw as primitive and embarrassingly soft training methods. A Calori cadet with bright blue scales and razor-sharp claws commented that humans seemed to train on cushioned surfaces because they were too fragile to handle real ground, and his observation earned approving clicks from others of his kind. Even the usually reserved Valorians, a species known for their incredible speed and agility, exchanged amused glances at the footage, though they remained quieter than the boisterous Torvani contingent. Scylla, a female Valorian cadet with silver skin and large amber eyes, watched the human training footage with more curiosity than mockery, but she said nothing to defend the absent humans when her fellow cadets made their jokes. Commander Zethros allowed the laughter to continue for a moment before raising one of his 4 hands to restore order. And he reminded the cadets that every species had earned their place in the coalition through their own methods. Though his tone suggested he shared some of their skepticism about human combat capabilities. The presentation continued, but the damage was done. And throughout the rest of the session, cadets whispered jokes about humans and their soft training whenever Commander Zethros turned his attention elsewhere. Rektal was particularly vocal, telling anyone who would listen that he could complete an entire Earth training course before breakfast and still have energy left to defeat 10 human soldiers in combat. And his confidence was matched only by his physical size. The Torvani were known throughout the galaxy as one of the most physically powerful species, with dense muscle tissue and bones that could withstand impacts that would shatter most other creatures. So their dismissal of human capabilities carried weight among the other cadets. What none of them knew was that a human instructor had been assigned to the academy just 3 days ago, and she was currently walking through the main corridor toward the administrative building, where Captain Daniel Scott waited to brief her on her new posting. Sergeant Lisa Morgan was 34 years old, born and raised in the dry heat of Texas, and she had served in the coalition military for 12 years, earning commendations and scars in equal measure across half a dozen conflict zones. She stood 5 feet 8 inches tall, which made her tiny by Torvani standards and unremarkable by most galactic measurements. But those who had seen her in combat knew that size told only a fraction of any warrior story. Daniel met her at the entrance to the administrative wing, his expression carrying a mixture of welcome and warning as he fell into step beside her. He explained quietly that word had already spread through the cadet population about her arrival, and the reception was unlikely to be friendly, given what had happened in the lecture hall that morning. Lisa listened without interruption as Daniel described the mockery, the laughter, and the particular comments made by Rektal and his Tarvani companions. And when he finished, she asked only one question. Where is the training arena? She wanted to know. Daniel stopped walking and studied her face, searching for anger or hurt or some sign of how she planned to respond to the disrespect. But Lisa's expression remained as calm as still water. He told her the arena was in the Eastern Dome, accessible through the main corridor and down 2 levels. But he advised her to wait a day or 2 before making any public appearances, giving the cadets time to move on to other topics of conversation. Lisa thanked him for the advice, but declined to take it, explaining that waiting would only give the mockery time to grow roots, and she preferred to address problems while they were still young. She shifted the small training bag on her shoulder and asked Daniel to inform Commander Zethros that she would be conducting an introductory demonstration in the arena within the hour. Daniel protested that such haste was unnecessary and potentially unwise, but Lisa simply smiled and told him that Earth training had taught her many things, including the value of making strong first impressions. She walked away before he could argue further, her boots clicking steadily against the polished floor of the corridor, and Daniel watched her go with a mixture of concern and curiosity. He had read her service file before her arrival, and he knew that Lisa Morgan had survived situations that would have broken most soldiers, human or otherwise, but files only told part of any story. As Lisa made her way toward the Eastern Dome, cadets of various species passed her in the corridor, and several of them recognized her uniform as human military issue, which prompted whispers and poorly hidden smirks. A pair of Kelari cadets deliberately bumped her shoulder as they walked past, testing her reaction, but Lisa simply adjusted her course and continued forward without acknowledging them. Their laughter followed her down the corridor, and one of them called out that humans were apparently too weak to even defend their own personal space. Lisa heard every word but kept walking, her mind already focused on what lay ahead, because she knew that words meant nothing compared to actions, and she had come to the academy prepared to act. The entrance to the arena appeared before her, a massive archway leading into a domed structure that could seat thousands of spectators, and Lisa paused for just a moment to take in its scale before stepping through. Inside, the arena floor stretched out like a gray metal ocean, specially reinforced to withstand the most powerful impacts that any species could deliver. And observation platforms ringed the space at multiple levels. Lisa walked to the center of the empty arena and set down her training bag, then turned in a slow circle to examine the space where she would soon make her introduction to the Coalition's finest cadets. A small smile crossed her face as she considered what was coming, and she began her preparations with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that the best victories required careful groundwork. The cadets thought they knew what humans were capable of, but Lisa Morgan had traveled across the galaxy to teach them otherwise, and the lesson would begin very soon. Word spread through the academy faster than light through empty space, and within 30 minutes of Lisa's arrival at the arena, hundreds of cadets had abandoned their scheduled activities to crowd onto the observation platforms above the combat floor. Commander Zethros had received Daniel Scott's message about the human instructor's planned demonstration, and though he found the timing unusual, he saw no reason to deny her request, especially when it provided an opportunity to assess human capabilities firsthand. The Torvani commander took his position on the primary observation platform, flanked by senior instructors from other species, and he watched with clinical interest as the small human female stood alone in the center of the massive arena. Rektal had claimed a front row position on the lower platform, surrounded by his fellow Torvani cadets, and his booming voice carried across the arena as he made jokes about the human size. He asked loudly if she had gotten lost on her way to a children's play area, and his companions roared with laughter at his wit. Scylla the Valorian stood several meters away from the Tovani group, her amber eyes fixed on the human with an expression of genuine curiosity rather than mockery, because she had noticed something in the way Lisa carried herself that the others seemed to miss. The human moved with a certain economy of motion, no wasted energy, no nervous gestures, just calm and deliberate control that spoke of deep training and experience. Commander Zethros activated the arena's amplification system and formally introduced a new human instructor to the assembled cadets, and his voice echoed through the dome with official authority. He announced that Sergeant Lisa Morgan of the Earth Coalition forces would be conducting a demonstration of human combat methodology, and he reminded the cadets that respectful attention was expected from all observers. His reminder did little to quiet the snickering from the Torvani section, and Rektal made no effort to hide his amusement as he called out a direct challenge to the human below. He demanded that she prove Earth training produced real warriors, because from what he had seen in the morning's presentation, humans trained like prey animals learning to run away more efficiently. His words hung in the air of the arena, and many cadets leaned forward in anticipation of how the human would respond to such public disrespect. Lisa looked up at Rektal without any visible anger or embarrassment, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the amplification system with perfect calm. She asked him a simple question, wanting to know what he believed made someone a true warrior. Rektal straightened with pride and answered without hesitation, declaring that a warrior was defined by strength, speed, and the will to crush enemies beneath their feet. His fellow Tolvani stomped their feet in approval of his answer, creating a thunderous rhythm that shook the observation platform. Lisa nodded slowly, as if considering his words with genuine respect, and then she offered her own perspective. Those were valuable tools, she agreed, but tools were not the same as foundations, and a warrior who confused the two would eventually discover the difference in the worst possible way. Rektal's expression darkened at what he perceived as an insult, and he demanded to know what a human could possibly teach Torvani warriors about combat. Lisa did not rise to his anger, instead addressing Commander Zethros with a formal request. She proposed a demonstration rather than a simple sparring match, something that would show the cadets what Earth training actually produced in its soldiers, and she asked for permission to proceed. Commander Zethros exchanged glances with the other senior instructors, intrigued despite his own skepticism, and he granted her request with a wave of one massive hand. The arena floor was already clear, but maintenance drones moved along the edges anyway, ensuring that nothing would interfere with whatever the human had planned. Lisa removed her uniform jacket and set it aside, revealing a simple training shirt that showed lean, defined muscles across her arms and shoulders. More interesting to the observant watchers were the scars that marked her skin, old wounds that had healed but left permanent reminders of battle survived. Scylla noticed at least 7 distinct scar patterns on the human's visible skin, and she found herself wondering what kind of conflicts had marked this small creature so thoroughly. Lisa addressed the crowd again, asking for the arena's artificial gravity to be adjusted to Earth standard, which she specified as 1G. Laughter erupted from multiple platforms, because most species in the coalition came from worlds with gravity lower than Earth's crushing pull, and the cadets assumed the human wanted to make things easier for herself. Rektal shouted that even in her demonstration, the human sought advantages, reducing the gravity so she would not tire so quickly. Commander Zethros silenced him with a sharp gesture and ordered the gravity adjustment, curious to see where this was leading. The environmental systems hummed as they shifted, and within moments, the arena floor registered Earth standard gravity, a weight that pressed noticeably heavier on the bodies of most observers. Cadets who had ventured down to floor level felt the difference immediately and retreated to the elevated platforms where the gravity remained at station standard. Lisa stood alone on the arena floor, bearing the weight of her homeworld's pull as naturally as breathing, and she began to move through a series of stretches and warm-up exercises. The Tovani cadets mocked her preparations, calling them the movements of someone preparing for a gentle walk rather than combat. Lisa ignored them and continued her routine, loosening muscles and joints with practiced precision, her focus entirely internal as she prepared her body for what was to come. After several minutes, she stopped and addressed the crowd once more, explaining that she wanted them to understand something about Earth before she continued. Earth was what galactic scientists classified as a death world, she told them. A planet with gravity strong enough to crush creatures from lighter worlds. Weather violent enough to level cities, predators evolved to hunt and kill anything they could catch, and natural disasters that struck without warning or mercy. Humans had not evolved to be the strongest species on their own planet, she continued, and they were far from the fastest or the most naturally armored. What humans had evolved was the ability to endure, to adapt, and most importantly, to push past limits that other species accepted as absolute. She demonstrated a series of combat moves as she spoke, flowing through techniques from various Earth martial arts with fluid grace. The cadets recognized some movements as similar to styles from their own worlds, but others were completely unfamiliar. Strange angles and explosive motions that seemed to generate power from impossible positions. Scylla called out a question, asking about one particular style that she did not recognize, a technique that seemed to generate tremendous force from very close range. Lisa explained that it was called Bajikiwan, an ancient martial art from a region of Earth called China, designed specifically to deliver devastating power when an opponent was too close for conventional strikes. She would demonstrate a modified version of one of its signature moves. She announced a technique called the Iron Mountain Lean. Commander Zethros leaned forward with genuine interest now, his earlier skepticism giving way to professional curiosity about what this human intended to show them. Lisa asked everyone near floor level to move back to the elevated platforms, explaining that she did not want anyone caught in the demonstration's effects. Some cadets laughed at the warning, unable to imagine what a single human could do that would threaten observers at distance, but they complied with her request anyway. When the floor was clear, Lisa walked to the exact center of the arena and took her position, her bare feet planted firmly on the reinforced surface. She closed her eyes and drew a slow breath, centering herself in the way her instructors had taught her decades ago. And when she spoke again, her voice was quiet but carried clearly through the silent arena. Earth training was not about looking strong, she said, and it was not about impressive displays or loud boasts. It was about becoming something that did not break, no matter what force was applied against it, and learning to deliver that same unbreakable force against anything that stood in the way. She opened her eyes, and Scylla saw something in them that made her silver skin prickle with sudden warning. The demonstration was about to begin. The arena fell into complete silence as Lisa Morgan stood at its center, her eyes closed and her breathing slow and controlled. And every cadet on the observation platforms found themselves leaning forward despite their earlier mockery. Even Vrektal had stopped making jokes, something in the human's posture triggering ancient instincts that warned him to pay attention. Commander Zethros watched with the analytical eye of a veteran warrior, noting how the human had planted her feet in a wide stance that seemed designed to channel force through her entire body structure. Lisa began to speak without opening her eyes, her voice carrying through the amplification system in a tone that was almost meditative. She explained that the technique she would demonstrate was not about raw strength, because humans would never match the pure physical power of species like the Torvani. It was about understanding how force worked, how it could be gathered and focused and released in ways that multiplied its effect beyond what muscle alone could achieve. On Earth, she continued, human children began learning these principles before they could read, breaking wooden boards and clay bricks as part of their earliest training. By the time they reached adulthood, the best practitioners had learned to break things that should not break, materials that physics and engineering said were too strong for unaugmented flesh and bone to damage. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Rektal on the observation platform. The secret, she told him, was not in the body but in the mind, in the absolute belief that limits existed only until someone decided to move past them. Rektal held her gaze, but found he could not think of anything to say in response, which was unusual for him. Lisa shifted her weight slightly, settling deeper into her stance, and she raised her right arm in a position that seemed almost casual. She would strike the arena floor, she announced, using the modified Iron Mountain lean technique, and she invited the cadets to observe what happened when human training met galactic engineering. Several Tovani cadets laughed at this, pointing out that the arena floor was made from reinforced composite materials designed to withstand gladiatorial combat between the strongest species in the coalition. Even a Torvani warrior at full strength could not damage that floor without powered armor or heavy weapons, they claimed. Lisa smiled slightly and asked if they would like to place a wager on that assessment. The laughter died as cadets realized she was serious, that this small human genuinely intended to strike the floor with her bare body and expected to achieve something notable. Commander Zethros raised a hand to prevent any gambling, reminding the cadets that betting was against Academy regulations, but his eyes remained fixed on Lisa with intense curiosity. The arena's environmental systems hummed in the background, maintaining Earth gravity on the combat floor, and sensors monitored every aspect of the space with precision instruments. Lisa drew a deep breath and held it, her muscles tensing in a wave that started at her feet and traveled upward through her legs, her core, her shoulders, and finally her raised arm. Scylla watched the human's body language with the trained eye of a Valorian hunter, and she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. The human was not just preparing to strike. She was gathering herself in a way that compressed all her potential energy into a single point, like a star collapsing before it exploded. Lisa released her breath in a sharp sound that echoed through the arena. Her body moved in a blur of motion that even Valorian eyes struggled to track, dropping and rotating as her right elbow and shoulder drove downward toward the arena floor with her entire mass behind them. The impact produced a sound unlike anything the cadets had ever heard, a thunderous crack that seemed to split the air itself and echoed off the dome ceiling like a physical blow. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen, and then the arena floor began to move. A jagged line appeared in the reinforced composite surface, starting from the point of Lisa's impact and racing outward like lightning frozen in metal. The crack spread 15 meters across the arena floor before it finally stopped, leaving a visible split in material that was supposed to withstand Starship hull stress tests. Warning alarms blared throughout the dome as structural sensors detected the damage, and automated systems began flashing emergency indicators across every control panel in the facility. Dust rose from the cracked floor, drifting upward in the Earth's standard gravity, and Lisa straightened slowly from her striking position with no visible strain or injury. Complete silence gripped the observation platforms, 300 cadets staring at the impossible damage before them with expressions of pure shock. Commander Zethros rose from his seat, all four of his hands gripping the platform railing as he leaned forward to confirm what his eyes were telling him. The arena floor, designed by the finest engineers in the coalition to withstand combat between species far stronger than humans, had been cracked by a single strike from an unaugmented human female. Rektal's mouth hung open, his earlier mockery completely forgotten as his mind struggled to process what he had just witnessed. Scylla felt her hearts racing, both of them beating faster than they had since her last combat trial, because she finally understood why the older Valorians spoke of humans with such careful respect. Lisa brushed dust from her hands and looked up at the assembled cadets, her expression calm and controlled, as if she had done nothing more impressive than open a door. She addressed Commander Zethros directly, asking if the demonstration had been sufficient to illustrate her point about Earth training methods. The Tovani commander found his voice after several attempts, asking how such a thing was possible without powered armor or cybernetic enhancement. Lisa's answer was simple and direct. 10,000 hours of practice, she told him. Proper technique refined over generations of human martial artists, and the understanding that limits existed only until someone decided to move past them. She walked toward the edge of the arena floor, stepping over the crack she had created as casually as if it were a line painted on the ground. On Earth, she continued, they taught children to break boards and bricks before they turned 10 years old. Not because those materials were difficult to break, but because the act of breaking them taught the children something important. It taught them that the barriers they saw in the world were not always as solid as they appeared, and that human will and training could overcome obstacles that seemed impossible. She stopped at the edge of the floor and looked up at Reptile, who still had not found words. The Tovani trained their warriors in gladiatorial pits, she acknowledged, and that training produced impressive physical strength and combat skills. But human training produced something different, she explained. Warriors who looked at impossible challenges and saw opportunities, who faced superior strength and found ways to multiply their own. Repair drones began to emerge from maintenance ports around the arena, their sensors scanning the damaged floor as they calculated what would be needed to fix it. Commander Zethros finally sat back in his seat, his expression a mixture of shock and professional respect that he made no effort to hide. He had served in the coalition military for 40 years and had seen warriors from dozens of species demonstrate their capabilities, but he had never seen anything quite like what this human had just done. The cadets remained silent, their earlier mockery transformed into something that felt very different, and Lisa allowed the moment to stretch without filling it with unnecessary words. Some lessons were better learned through observation than explanation, and the crack in the arena floor spoke more eloquently than any speech she could have given. She picked up her jacket from where she had left it and pulled it back on, covering the scars that marked her skin and the muscles that had just accomplished the impossible. The demonstration was complete, but she suspected that the real lessons were only beginning to take shape in the minds of those who had watched. The repair drones worked steadily on the cracked arena floor, their welding tools casting blue light across the damaged surface, and the cadets slowly began to recover from the shock of what they had witnessed. Commander Zethros had called an immediate assembly of his senior staff, and the instructors gathered in a private conference room adjacent to the arena while the cadets remained on the observation platforms. The Tovani commander stood at the head of the table, his forearms crossed in a posture that indicated deep thought, and he addressed his colleagues with uncharacteristic uncertainty. He admitted that in 40 years of military service, he had never seen an unaugmented organic being damage reinforced combat flooring with a bare body strike. A Valorian senior instructor named the Sara spoke up, noting that her species had long maintained files on human capabilities that most coalition members dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. Those files suggested that humans were far more dangerous than their physical measurements indicated, she explained, and today's demonstration seemed to confirm the accuracy of those old reports. A Kalori instructor with bright orange scales expressed skepticism, suggesting that perhaps the arena floor had been weakened beforehand or that the human had used some concealed technology. Commander Zethros shut down that theory immediately, explaining that he had personally reviewed the sensor data and found no evidence of any artificial assistance or prior damage to the flooring. The human had struck the floor with nothing but but her own body. He confirmed, and the force generated had exceeded anything in their models for unaugmented human capabilities. Meanwhile, on the observation platforms, the cadets had begun talking among themselves in hushed voices that carried a very different tone than their earlier mockery. Rektal stood apart from his fellow Torvani, his eyes still fixed on the crack in the arena floor as his mind replayed what he had seen over and over. He had spent his entire life believing that physical strength was the ultimate measure of a warrior, and his species had reinforced that belief at every opportunity. Tovani children were ranked by their strength from the moment they could walk, and those who showed the most physical power received the most respect and opportunity. But what he had just witnessed challenged everything he thought he knew about combat and about the nature of true warriors. The human was physically weaker than him by every measurable standard. Shorter, lighter, with muscles that would barely register on Tovani's strength assessments. Yet she had accomplished something that he could not do, something that no Tarvani could do without technological assistance, and she had done it with apparent ease. Scylla approached him cautiously, recognizing the signs of a warrior whose worldview was shifting beneath his feet. She asked if he was beginning to understand why the Valorians had remained quiet during the morning's mockery. Rektal turned to face her, and his expression held none of the arrogance that usually characterized Torvani interactions with other species. He asked what she knew about humans that he did not. Scylla explained that her grandmother had served alongside human soldiers during the Frontier Wars, 30 years before either of them was born. Those humans had been smaller and weaker than every other species in their unit. She continued, and the other soldiers had initially dismissed them as support personnel who would stay behind the lines. But when the fighting started, those humans had proven themselves in ways that no one expected, taking risks that seemed suicidal and somehow surviving, adapting to situations that left other species paralyzed with confusion. Her grandmother had once watched a human soldier defeat a Torvani enemy combatant in close-quarters combat. Not through superior strength, but through technique and relentless aggression that never allowed the larger opponent to use his advantages. Rektal listened with an intensity that surprised even himself, hungry for information that might help him understand what he had witnessed. Scylla told him that her grandmother had learned an important lesson from that experience, one that she had passed down to her family. Never underestimate humans based on their appearance, because what they lacked in physical power, they made up for in adaptability, creativity, and an almost disturbing willingness to push beyond limits that other species accepted. On the arena floor below, Lisa had finished speaking with Captain Daniel Scott, who had rushed to the arena as soon as word reached him about the demonstration. Daniel looked at the crack in the floor with an expression that mixed professional admiration with personal concern. He asked Lisa quietly if she had really needed to make such a dramatic statement on her first day. Lisa smiled and replied that sometimes the most effective communication required visual aids. Daniel shook his head but could not hide his own smile, admitting that she had certainly gotten everyone's attention. He reported that Commander Zethros had already requested a full briefing on human combat training methods, and the other senior instructors were demanding similar information. Lisa nodded, explaining that this was exactly what she had hoped to achieve. Words and presentations could be dismissed, she told him, but a visible demonstration of capability tended to stick in people's memories. She looked up at the observation platforms, where hundreds of cadets still stood watching, and she noted that the laughter had stopped. Daniel followed her gaze and agreed that the mockery seemed to have ended, at least for now. He warned her that some cadets might respond to this demonstration with fear rather than respect, and fear could turn into aggression if it was not handled carefully. Lisa acknowledged the risk but expressed confidence that most of the cadets were too professional to let wounded pride drive their behavior. The few who might cause problems would identify themselves soon enough, she added, and she would address them appropriately when they did. Commander Zethros emerged from the conference room and made his way to the main observation platform, where he addressed the assembled cadets in a voice that carried clear authority. He announced that Sergeant Morgan's demonstration had concluded, and he ordered all cadets to return to their scheduled activities immediately. He added that the Academy's training curriculum would be under review in light of today's events, and cadets should expect changes to their programs in the coming weeks. The cadets began to disperse, filing out of the arena in groups that buzzed with quiet conversation. Rektal did not move, remaining at the platform railing as he watched Lisa gather her training bag and prepare to leave the arena floor. Scylla stayed beside him, sensing that he was working through something important. Finally, Rektal spoke, asking her if she thought the human would agree to train him personally. Scylla expressed a surprise at the question, noting that just hours ago he had been mocking human combat methods as inferior. Rektal admitted that he had been wrong, speaking the words with difficulty because admitting error was not something Torvani did easily. He explained that his entire understanding of what made a warrior had been built on a foundation, that today's demonstration had proven incomplete. If humans could achieve such results through training alone, he continued, then there were aspects of combat that Torvani methods were failing to address. He wanted to understand those aspects, to expand his capabilities beyond what his species' traditional training could provide. Scylla studied him for a long moment, then nodded with what might have been approval. She told him that was the most intelligent thing she had ever heard a Torvani say. Rektal accepted the compliment without his usual defensiveness, his mind already focused on how he would approach the human instructor. Below them, Lisa Morgan walked toward the arena exit, unaware of the conversation happening above her, but confident that seeds had been planted. The crack in the floor would be repaired within days, but the cracks in the cadets' assumptions would take much longer to heal, and from those cracks, something new and better might grow. She had come to the academy to teach, and today's lesson had only been the introduction. 3 days had passed since the demonstration that cracked the arena floor, and the academy had not stopped talking about what they had witnessed. Lisa Morgan had spent those days in meetings with Commander Zethros and his senior staff, presenting detailed information about Earth combat training methods and answering countless questions about human martial arts. The Torvani commander had proven to be a more thoughtful leader than Lisa had initially assumed, setting aside his species' pride to genuinely engage with the possibility that human techniques could benefit coalition training. He had ordered a comprehensive review of the academy curriculum, with specific attention to the mental and technical aspects of combat that Torvani methods had traditionally neglected. Lisa was walking through the academy courtyard on the evening of the 3rd day, enjoying a rare moment of quiet after the intensity of the meetings, when she heard heavy footsteps approaching from behind. She turned to find Rektal standing several meters away, his posture uncertain in a way that seemed foreign to his massive frame. The young Torvani was alone, separated from the group of companions who usually surrounded him, and his expression carried none of the arrogance she had seen in the arena. He asked if he could speak with her, and his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. Lisa nodded and gestured for him to walk beside her, and they moved through the courtyard together in silence for several moments. Finally, Rektal spoke, his words coming slowly as if each one required effort. He told her that he had been wrong about humans, wrong about Earth training, wrong about what made someone a true warrior. Lisa listened without interruption, giving him space to say what he needed to say. He explained that his entire life had been shaped by Torvani beliefs about strength and power, beliefs that had seemed so obviously correct that he had never thought to question them. The stronger warrior won, the weaker warrior lost, and physical power was the ultimate measure of combat capability. But what she had done in the arena had shattered those beliefs, because she had accomplished something that no amount of Torvani strength could achieve. He had spent 3 days thinking about what that meant, he continued, and he had reached a conclusion that was difficult for him to accept. Tovani training produced strong warriors, but human training produced something more complete. Warriors who could overcome challenges that raw strength alone could not solve. He stopped walking and turned to face her directly, then performed a gesture that Lisa recognized from her briefings as a formal Tovani sign of respect between warriors. He placed his upper right hand over his chest and bowed his head slightly, a movement that Tovani reserved for those they considered worthy of genuine honor. Lisa accepted the gesture with a small bow of her own, understanding the significance of what Rektal was offering. He asked if she would consider training him personally, teaching him the principles and techniques that had allowed her to do the impossible. Lisa studied him for a long moment before responding, searching for any sign that his request was less than sincere. She found only honest desire to learn, a quality that she valued above almost all others in a student. She agreed to train him, but warned him that Earth methods were not gentle, and he would face challenges that his previous training had not prepared him to handle. Rektal straightened with something like his old confidence, declaring that he had survived Tovani gladiatorial trials and was not afraid of difficult training. Lisa smiled and told him that confidence was good, but might need adjustment once he experienced what Earth martial artists considered basic conditioning. She added that Earth training did not look impressive until the moment it mattered, and by then it was usually too late for whoever had underestimated it. Rektal nodded, accepting her warning without argument, which was itself a sign of how much his thinking had changed. They agreed to begin the following morning, and Rektal departed with a lighter step than he had arrived with. Lisa watched him go, then turned to find Daniel Scott approaching from across the courtyard. He had observed the exchange from a distance and wore an expression of amused satisfaction. He commented that she could have simply beaten Rektal in a sparring match on the first day and achieved the same result with less property damage. Lisa shook her head and explained that winning a fight was simple, but changing how someone thought required a different kind of impact. If she had defeated Rektal physically, he would have found excuses for his loss and learned nothing important. But by demonstrating something that physical strength could never achieve, she had forced him to question his fundamental assumptions. That questioning would make him a better warrior than any number of sparring victories could accomplish. Daniel nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in her approach. He reported that Commander Zethras had sent a formal commendation to Earth Coalition Command, praising her demonstration and requesting additional human instructors for the Academy. Lisa expressed satisfaction at this news, noting that getting Tovani to request human assistance was an achievement that many had thought impossible. Daniel added that Scylla the Valorian had also asked about training opportunities, and several cadets from other species had made similar inquiries. Lisa was not surprised, explaining that she had seen Scylla watching during the demonstration with the eyes of someone who understood what she was seeing. The Valorians had long respected human capabilities, she noted, even when other species dismissed them. They finished their walk through the courtyard as the artificial sun dimmed toward evening, and Lisa paused at the entrance to the trainee barracks. A group of cadets had gathered near the doorway, and they watched her approach with expressions very different from the mockery she had faced on her first day. Some looked curious, others appeared thoughtful, and a few showed something that might have been the beginning of genuine respect. Lisa greeted them with a nod and continued inside, aware that the dynamic between her and the cadets had fundamentally shifted. She had come to the Academy as an object of ridicule, a representative of a species that the galaxy's warriors considered weak and soft. She was leaving that courtyard as something else entirely, an instructor whose capabilities defied explanation and whose methods might hold secrets worth learning. Somewhere in the Coalition's vast administrative network, a clerk in the Species Assessment Division received a notification from Commander Zethros and updated humanity's official military capability file. The update included footage from the arena demonstration, detailed sensor readings from the impact, and a recommendation that would eventually reach every coalition military commander. The recommendation reads simply, "Exercise caution when assessing human combat capabilities, as observed potential exceeds all current projections." It was a small change to a bureaucratic document, but it represented something much larger. For the first time in the Coalition's history, a non-human commander had officially acknowledged that humans might be more dangerous than their physical characteristics suggested. Lisa Morgan did not know about the updated file and probably would not have cared if she did. She had not come to the Academy for recognition or administrative victories. She had come to teach, to share the lessons that Earth had burned into her body and mind over decades of training and combat. The cadets who had laughed at human methods would become the warriors who carried those methods forward, adapting them, improving them, and passing them on to the next generation. That was the true victory, not the crack in the arena floor or the shock on Torvani faces, but the change in thinking that would ripple outwards through the Coalition for years to come. Lisa settled into her quarters and began preparing lesson plans for the morning, when Vrekthal and whoever else showed up would begin learning what Earth training really meant. The demonstration was over, but the teaching was just beginning, and Lisa Morgan was very good at her job.